Hello. Life has been fairly precarious recently, hasn't it? It feels like nothing matters, and that no matter what we're doing and all our efforts, we won't see any meaningful improvements to the issues we face. Why even bother? This is a very common nihilistic perspective, particularly among young people, which isn't surprising seeing the situation that we're currently living in and through. The capitalist system has, since the 80s, consistently failed to serve young people even the various crumbs that it managed to deliver to their parents. Climate crisis has reached a boiling point, where some are even wondering if there is a future to our species, no matter what the scientific consensus says. People are socially alienated from each other and from their work, with no fulfillment otherwise in their lives, and generally find it difficult just to get up in the morning because what's the point? Does this mean that this nihilism is necessary or even correct? Let's take a look. First of all, what is this based on? The precarity of modern life has a few factors contributing to it. Those being loneliness, the widespread and misused idea of what life should be through social media and other factors, the commodification of love, precarious work conditions and all the consequences of that, the extensive burden of providing even bare necessities for ourselves, amongst many other deviations in current life. Let's begin with loneliness. According to the Campaign to End Loneliness, in 2022, half of all adults in the UK reported feeling lonely. Approximately 7% feel that they experience chronic loneliness, and this has only risen since COVID. Loneliness is dangerous for a variety of reasons, but one of the major ones is the social isolation that comes with it, where someone has next to no social relationships, is infrequently in social contact with other people, and even have difficulty in making new connections because of learned patterns. Loneliness greatly affects mental health in a negative way, unsurprisingly, as it increases the risk of premature death, is associated with a 50% increased risk of dementia, 29% increased risk of heart disease, and 32% for stroke. Likewise, unsurprisingly, this is a rising trend among the young, where you always feel like you're the one doing the inviting and never getting invited out yourself. Maybe you don't have any friends, or the social connections you do have are fragile, potentially internet-based, and lack a deeper sense of emotional fulfillment. Why has this happened? Ever since the 1940s onwards, a particular trend of capitalist development has been the atomization of individuals and a drive for cultural change which emphasizes hyper-individualism. Compared to feudalism and other pre-capitalist socioeconomic formations, which for the most part were highly agrarian and as a result required large communities that were tightly knit to work farms manually. Because of this, people had much stronger connections with each other, usually lived incredibly close to one another in large family units, which allowed them to develop deep social connections early on that would last throughout their life. Once feudalism and other pre-capitalist setups were overcome, we entered into the capitalist mode of production where social connections and culture would be subordinated to the demands of the system. Those of course being hyper-individualism and atomization of communities and individuals. This took many decades because of the cultural hold of former socioeconomic conditions, of course, but under capitalism it isn't conducive to have large, tightly knit communities that rely on one another, live in shared accommodations, and have a generally aligned life purpose. Of course, we're leaving apart the nuance of the relative simplicity of what life was under feudalism and earlier socioeconomic setups compared with now. Nowadays, it's more conducive and profitable for the capitalist system for you to have your own apartment or accommodation, to live in it alone or with only a significant other, for both of you to have your own vehicles, for every other adult member of your family to live on their own, essentially, to pay several mortgages or rents instead of just one, several grocery bills instead of just one, several utility bills instead of just one, on and on. Back to the video in just a second. Let's hear from today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. For a lot of research that I do for my videos, I end up hitting pages that aren't available in my location. That's frustrating, as you can imagine. Geo-restriction really does suck, but not with Atlas VPN. For those unaware, a virtual private network makes all of your internet traffic travel through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it protects you from spying, public Wi-Fi dangers, and hides your IP address and your online activities. It even allows you to change your location for all your researching needs. Developed by top cybersecurity specialists and IT engineers in 2019, Atlas VPN was created to make the internet accessible and secure for everyone. Currently, it has more than 6 million users worldwide and boasts the best VPN deal on the market. Right now, there's even a fantastic Black Friday special. So, what are you waiting for? Go down to the description and click that link, use my code Hakeem and get a 3-year subscription for just $1.70 a month with 6 months extra on top. But that's not all. You get blazing fast speeds for streaming or gaming, unlimited protection for all your devices, and an inbuilt ad and malware blocker. And you'll get to save some extra cash as Atlas VPN will find you the best deals online for everything from your online subscriptions to airlines, hotels, and more. Do us both a favor and get Atlas VPN Premium for just $1.70 per month, plus 6 months extra with a 30-day money-back guarantee. It's the best Atlas VPN offer of the year, so be quick and get your deal by clicking the link in the video description below to get this limited time offer. Massive thanks to Atlas VPN for the sponsorship. This is what allows me to pay my editor fairly, so the support is highly appreciated. Alright, back to the video. This deeply ingrained human desire for creating communities, which was catered to in former socioeconomic setups, has been negatively targeted by capitalist conditioning for over a century now, through the language of freedom, individuality, creativity, independence, and other associated nebulous concepts. Of course, all this is nonsense. You're not less creative, free, or have a less meaningful identity just because you would like to remain within socially connected communities, but that's not what the conditioning is meant to portray. Remember, everything is an ad. This is all a drive by advertisers to get you to buy and consume more, for you to be less dependent on others, so that if you need something, then you'll go out and buy it, or more often than not, subscribe to it for a monthly fee. Further evidence for this is the fact that globally, in less developed capitalist economies, quote-unquote, and those lower on the rungs of late-stage capitalism have much more socially vibrant and interconnected communities, mostly because of cultural holdovers, but also a good chunk because of a more immature capitalist superstructure that cannot drive the same hyper-individualism that is being accepted in the so-called highly developed capitalist countries, although attempts and subtle changes are taking place. This leads also to another aspect of social alienation, which is a public image of social life that you feel like you'll never be part of, in which people your age or even younger than you are jet-setting, seeing the world, experiencing things you most likely will never get to experience, and all the rest. This public image is of course a mirage, it doesn't exist, but this propaganda, from direct advertising to even possibly seeing this from people you know in real life trying to push forward this image of themselves, is all pervasive, so you feel like you're missing out even if it is a mirage, regardless. To no one's surprise, this increases rates of anxiety and depression. Closely connected is love life, too, which is commodified and difficult to find. Most young people a century ago would have had a much easier time finding serious partners with long-term prospects because of less social isolation, common community activities from religious centers to simply larger interconnected neighborhoods which facilitated interactions between similarly aged people and a generally different cultural attitude. Nowadays, the vast majority of us work very long hours for insignificant pay despite even being highly educated in economically significant and important fields. We have smaller groups of friends who in turn also likewise have fewer social connections, preventing you from developing the highly interconnected network that your grandparents may have had. Social spaces which allow young people to meet and interact have likewise all but been entirely commodified, with many common spaces where you can just vibe for free being outright eliminated if they even existed in your area in the first place. Cultural attitudes from chronically online youth, which results in either red pill garbage, what passes off as playful misandry on the other side, or a retreat into online communities where you can't develop real emotional connections, particularly with the opposite sex, becoming all more pervasive. It doesn't help that the most common and easiest general approach if you didn't meet your significant other in high school or university is for-profit dating apps whose intended purpose isn't for you to find a significant other and then get off the app, but to continuously fail or almost succeed and then fail again so that you can keep going back and paying. With a system like this, isn't it unsurprising that people have great difficulty in finding love or any other sort of meaningful connection? Your work, of course, plays the lion's share of misery in all of this. Even if you were, for example, a physician or engineer or whatever else, you most likely work long hours for generally bad pay considering the amount of work you do, or have a precarious state of employment otherwise in quote-unquote more quickly replaceable jobs. You'd likely have bad benefits if you have benefits at all, and live close to paycheck if you're not completely dependent on the end of the month to not sink. For a good chunk of our grandparents, depending on where you are of course in the world, you can have a high school degree or less, work a regular job usually without much educational requirement, get handsomely compensated for the work you do, with pretty decent benefits and the ability to have a generic nuclear family with a wife and several kids and a pet and a house and all the other prerequisites economically for maintaining and possibly even developing wealth into your old age, based solely on one single working adult. Nowadays, in most of the so-called developed economies, you practically need two working adults in much more developed fields, and you'll still not get even close to the comfort and general accumulation of wealth your grandparents may have experienced. Now, of course, we need to remember that the previous example isn't universal, with the usual exclusion of minorities, those from the imperial periphery, etc., and that it existed only because of the existence of labor unions, the existence of a globally powerful socialist movement that provided all these benefits, and more to their populations, hence forcing domestic ruling classes into giving concessions, and the extensive super-exploitation of the imperial periphery. That being said, since the 1970s, wages have been more or less stagnant, but productivity has skyrocketed. Inflation has eroded purchasing ability, particularly in recent years. The prices of even basic staple goods increase day by day, let alone over several year periods. Meanwhile, the general social deal we get from taxation seems to be essentially support wars abroad and bailouts for the wealthy at home. Is it at all surprising that this generation has a completely nonchalant attitude towards work, since all we've seen isn't the mythology that our parents or grandparents may have experienced, but instead a burdensome squeeze of each individual worker for ever greater and greater profits with absolutely next to no meaningful remuneration? One thing to emphasize is the bare necessities point. Things as simple as electricity, water, housing, food, and even internet, which is a prerequisite to living and working in the modern era, have become more expensive by the day, despite improving technology, supposedly improving infrastructure, which is what we pay taxes for, cheaper running costs and government subsidies for private providers of these utilities, and general examples globally which show that these can be run on a for-people rather than for-profit setup. The issue, of course, is profit-seeking and the never-ending drive for ever higher profits quarter after quarter within the capitalist system, which prevents public ownership of infrastructure and drives ever more privatization of the little that is publicly owned. A system predicated on infinite growth on a finite planet is a contradictory system that will kill the Earth and us with it. When you see 30, 40, 60, or even up to 80% of your paycheck go into base necessities, which you require to live in order to be able to go into work the next day, let alone to be able to enjoy life, it isn't surprising that a deep nihilism can develop. What's the point of working so hard if you're not ever going to build any meaningful sense of wealth to lift this burden off of you going into your old age, and likewise not even be able to use any of the money that you're currently making in order to enjoy life? Owning a house is a distant dream. Retirement is even further away, especially with the constant raising of the retirement age. This is compounded by the alienation from work, where you simply don't care what you're doing. Profit-seeking and quarter-on-quarter growth aren't good motivators to encourage you to contribute to the development of humanity. They're simply good for more profit-seeking for those that own, and alienation for those that don't. To parallel this, it's no surprise that people will work on things they're passionate about for less income and overall benefits, but if you want somebody to do something they don't want to do, which is the vast majority of modern labor, how much money do I need to be paid to overlook how much I'll dislike this work? This is reproduced on a society-wide basis throughout the widening of economic inequality and diminishing genuine growth within the economy and society as a whole. It doesn't matter if shareholders are getting a better and better quarter if the vast majority of the population continues to live a precarious existence with no meaningful improvement in their real income or living conditions. People are feeling that their living standards are getting actively worse, even in imperial periphery countries, as the requirements of life were cheaper and fewer in total number prior. This is further worsened by many, particularly young people, being very close to destitution because they usually own nothing, have tremendous debt, are forced to live in incredibly expensive cities because that's where all the jobs are, only to live paycheck to paycheck. This nihilism further grows by a general feeling of pointlessness when your healthiest and most active years are being spent building wealth for the tiniest slither of unaccountable elites, while you might never own a home or have freedom away from your job in order to spend more time with your loved ones, to travel, for hobbies, or all the other things that are more meaningful to you than line go up. As a result of this extensive nihilism that we see in society, there's been a general trend of unhealthy coping mechanisms, both healthy and unhealthy, to put it in strange terms. Some work out extensively for some sort of fulfillment, and others barely manage to drag themselves to the gym to maintain some semblance of activity. You force yourself out into being social even though you're drained from your work and don't feel a particularly meaningful connection to the people that you're trying to socialize with. Others drown themselves in substance and alcohol abuse or things that are likewise damaging, such as simple sexual gratification. The general point I'm driving isn't to justify this nihilism, but to show you that there is a material base for it and that it's not the natural state of things. People feel bad not because there's something wrong with them. People, their communities, ways of supporting themselves, even their social existence is at every level damaged and eroded by capitalist conditioning that demands forever higher profits and imposes an undemocratic and dictatorial setup in the places where we arguably spend the most amount of time awake, that being our jobs. All of what I've said today is dictated by politics. Good legislation and government investment, or better yet, dedicated social and economic plans, can reduce if not entirely eliminate most of these issues, and particularly the most pressing of them, those being the economic factors. Nihilism forces you out of political engagement and only benefits the ruling classes that exploit you and further destroy your quality of life and prospects. The point of all this is to change our socioeconomic conditions. To sink into our nihilism is to not only betray ourselves but also subject future generations to ever more social isolation and material degradation. Within the labor aristocratic countries, changing society may be more effort than it's worth, at least for now. But class struggle in the imperial periphery, as well as climate change, will very rapidly change the comfortable status quo and allow for major shifts within even the wealthiest of capitalist countries. In a macabre way of thinking, the worse things get, the better. Can things get worse? Yeah, but right now they're pretty bad as is, just in very boring ways. At every turn, the issue isn't immigrants, or women, or your parents, or anything else. It is the capitalist system, which sacrifices your future, your health, your social connections, your love life, everything else on the altar of profit so that it can ever grow. It's a cancer on humanity, and one we know how to get rid of and are ready to overcome. Participating in political organizations in your community, maintaining your health through diet and activity, particularly social if possible, finding some sort of spiritual fulfillment, particularly in socially active religious worship, which greatly reduces risk for depression, working hard to maintain these social connections that you currently do have, particularly within family, as well as continuously educating yourself, is the greatest bulwark against this nihilism, as it fortifies you while preparing you for the changing conditions that are currently happening and for those that are to come. We are not only interpreting the world, our goal is to change it. It is our world to win. That's all for this time. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to Nitro Dubs, Kenny, Thomas Roberts, Nicholas, Owen Baker, T. Wood, Dr. Lemonman, Lumix, Charlie and Eric, Ultimate Turin, Daniel Ethel, The Generic Guy, Santiago Pereira, Rain, Cassandra Corvus, David Fries, Confuse M, Mariana Mastusovic, Robbie Richardson, and Masay Kadro. Thanks for watching.